He opened the hospital door expecting another dead end, another update, another quiet voice saying, "We're trying our best, sir." But what he saw, he wasn't ready for. He froze. Something stopped him in his tracks. The room, the machines, the silence. They were all familiar. But this was different. He couldn't speak. He couldn't move. For a long second, all he could do was watch. And in that moment, everything he thought he understood about love, sacrifice, and who God chooses to use broke wide open. Helen Jackson wasn't on the schedule that morning. She wasn't supposed to be at the hospital. But there are some days when the weight in your spirit is louder than the noise of the world. And that morning, Helen moved. She didn't bring attention. She didn't make a call. She just showed up, heart steady, hands shaking, obedience in her step. Outside, the pavement was soaked with cold rain. Inside, the hospital lights buzzed softly. Machines lined up like soldiers in a battle no one was winning. Faith Gibson, just 8 years old, was losing the fight. Blood counts dropping. No donor found. Time running out. The nurse said quietly, "There's no match. We're still waiting." But Helen already knew she was the match. O negative, the rarest type, the universal donor, the one no one had. She said nothing to anyone, just whispered to the nurse, "Please, don't say my name, not yet." And then she sat down, rolled up her sleeve, closed her eyes, and gave. There were no cameras, no family watching, just a quiet woman offering what she had, as if it didn't cost her anything. But it did. It cost her more than anyone will ever know. Because what she gave that day wasn't just blood. It was her past, her pain, her story, and all the love she never got to give. Until now. Before we go deeper into this story, I want you to pause and breathe. If something in your heart is stirring right now, let it. This is not just a story. It's a reminder that sometimes God answers prayer through the people we least expect. So if you believe in quiet miracles, if you've ever been carried by someone who asked for nothing in return, then like this video. Share it with someone who needs hope today. And in the comments, tell us where in the world you're watching from. Because this story is for every country, every heart, every soul that still believes love is real, and that God still moves in the silence. The morning air hadn't warmed yet. A thin mist clung to the sidewalks outside the Gibson estate, where Helen Jackson stood under the front archway, one hand curled around a paper cup of tea that had already gone cold. She didn't drink it. She wasn't there to warm herself. Her phone buzzed once, a group text from the household staff. "Still no donor. Mr. Gibson's flight just landed. Update soon." Helen didn't respond. She already knew. The night before, she had gone home and opened the drawer she hadn't touched in years, the one with her mother's Bible, a stack of old blood work papers, and a folded piece of paper with her blood type, O negative. She'd known, of course, but seeing it again, in black ink, made her sit down on the edge of her bed and whisper aloud, "Okay, Lord, if this is me, I won't wait." So now here she was, not in uniform, not on shift. No one had asked her to come, but God had. The hospital was quiet in that strange, in-between way, not rushed but not still. The scent of bleach hung heavy in the air, the kind of clean that comes after too much pain. She found the pediatric wing by instinct. A young nurse looked up from the station, eyebrows lifted slightly at the sight of her. I think I might be a match," Helen said softly. "I work for the family. But I checked. I'm O negative." The nurse blinked, then stood quickly. "You're sure?" Helen nodded. A short while later, she was seated in the small donor room alone, but for the hum of the machines and the sound of rain against the windows. They ran a test, confirmed the match, brought the paperwork. She didn't ask to see it, just signed. Quietly. When she rolled up her sleeve, her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what this moment held. The nurse offered juice and a blanket. Helen shook her head. "Just don't say anything. Please. Not yet. The needle slid in, the bag began to fill, and in that sacred silence, something inside her broke open. Not in pain, but in surrender. She closed her eyes, and without meaning to, began humming. It was the same lullaby her mother had sung during storms. The same one she had once sung to Faith just a few weeks ago, when the child had cried herself to sleep after a long round of chemo. She didn't know all the words, but the melody lived in her hands, her chest, her soul. Outside that room, people passed by with clipboards and charts. Inside, blood flowed, one drop at a time, from the woman nobody ever noticed to the child everybody prayed for. 35 minutes later, Helen stood slowly. The nurse helped her into her coat. "You okay?" She nodded. But she didn't speak. The only sound she made was the quiet exhale of someone who had just given everything she had and didn't want to be thanked for it. Outside, the city had begun to wake. Traffic thickened. The sky stayed grey. But something had changed. Inside Faith's body, a miracle had begun. Helen climbed into a rideshare without saying a word. At the back gate of the Gibson estate, she walked in through the side entrance, unnoticed, unseen. She passed the kitchen, where the cook was reading a delivery invoice. No one looked up. She pulled her cardigan sleeve down over the bandage. Then stepped into Faith's room just to check. The child was sleeping. Her skin, still pale, had a different tone now, like color was thinking about returning. The machines beeped a steady rhythm, a quiet breath of life. Helen straightened the blanket, tucked it beneath the girl's chin, then placed the stuffed dolphin, Faith's favorite, closer to her side. She didn't cry, but something in her face softened, a private kind of peace. She turned to go. That's when she heard the front door. It swung open. Heavy steps. A man's voice, sharp, tired, already asking questions. Anthony Gibson had arrived. Helen stepped back into the hallway just as he turned the corner. He walked fast, briefcase in hand, phone at his ear. His eyes locked on the room. He didn't see her at first, but then he stopped. Just for a second. Their eyes met. Something flickered. A pause, a question not yet formed. But he moved on. Helen turned back toward the kitchen, pretending to busy her hands. Her knees still weak, her arm still tender. No one knew what she had just done, and she wasn't going to tell them. Not yet. What she had given wasn't just blood. It was a promise, and the kind of love that doesn't wait to be asked. The Gibson estate was quiet, not in the way peace feels, but in the way absence does. Everything in the house had its place. Marble floors without a single scuff, curtains pressed, pulled back just enough to let the morning light in, but never fully. Even the air felt measured, like it had been instructed not to move too freely. It was the kind of house where nothing was broken, but nothing felt alive. Anthony had built it that way. He believed in systems, in structure, a life where schedules solved problems and silence meant things were under control. Even grief, when it came, had been managed like a calendar event. After his wife died, a slow illness that stole her smile before her breath, Anthony never let himself fall apart. He buried himself in numbers, meetings, international calls. He took a week off to process and never spoke of it again. Faith was 5 at the time. She stopped asking why her mother wasn't coming home after the 3rd week. Anthony never explained it. He just hired more help, nannies, tutors, a private therapist who emailed progress updates twice a month. And Helen. Back then, she was just another name on a contract, a housekeeper, quiet, reliable. She had come through an agency. No fuss, no attachments, exactly what he wanted. Faith grew up in the echo of things left unsaid. She colored on paper, not walls, played alone quietly, asked small questions, never the big ones. At bedtime, it was Helen who stayed near the door a little longer. It was Helen who sat beside her when the nightlights flickered, Helen who learned her lullabies one line at a time. She never tried to replace anything, she just stayed. Not because it was her job, because the girl needed someone who wouldn't leave. Anthony didn't notice. Not fully. He'd pass by her room at night, phone pressed to his ear, nodding at the doctors on Zoom, never looking up long enough to see who was beside his daughter. He thought he was being strong, but strength without presence feels like absence in disguise. When Faith's symptoms began, the bruises, the tiredness, the unexplained fevers, Anthony handled it like a project. He booked appointments, researched the top oncologists, took notes, and when the diagnosis came, leukemia, he didn't cry. He asked for treatment options, spoke with legal about moving medical directives to his firm's private health plan, made lists. The word daughter was on every file, but he never said her name aloud during meetings. Then came the setbacks. She needed a blood transfusion and no match could be found. Her type was rare, hard to locate. The registry had nothing. The doctors told him gently, "We're working on it. It's not over." But to a man like Anthony, who always had a solution, it felt like failure. He didn't know how to fix this, and for the first time since losing his wife, he felt it again. That soundless panic, that helpless ache, the feeling that no amount of power, planning, or money could bend life to his will. He flew to New York for a biotech summit anyway, because action felt better than standing still. While he was gone, the house moved on without him, as it always had. Doctors came and went, nurses whispered to each other in hallways, Faith slept more, ate less, and Helen? Helen stayed. She packed meals Faith never finished, sat beside her during IV drips, folded the child's socks and prayed over each pair. No one told her to, but she did. She always had. By the time Anthony returned, it was early morning. His flight had landed late, his tie hung loose, his phone buzzed with unread messages. He didn't stop at home, he went straight to the hospital. Some part of him still hoped to be the first to arrive, the one who would walk in, take charge, and change the outcome. But when he opened that door, what he saw had already begun, and something inside him shifted. Not all at once, not enough to show, but something. He walked back out into the hallway, didn't speak to Helen, didn't ask a single question. But that night, at the house, he found himself pausing by Faith's door longer than usual. She was asleep, the dolphin toy tucked in close, a small drawing on the nightstand, a sun, 2 stick figures, and what looked like a woman in a red dress. The crayon above her head said, Helen. Anthony didn't smile, didn't cry, but he stood there, still, like a man hearing something he didn't quite recognize and wasn't ready to name. The rain hadn't stopped. It beat down in steady sheets over the hospital's parking lot as Anthony stepped out of the car. His coat collar turned up, briefcase in one hand, phone vibrating endlessly in the other. He didn't answer it. For once, he wasn't thinking about a call. He was thinking about her. Last night's updates had been short. Still weak, still no match, we're monitoring. It was the still that haunted him. The hallway smelled like bleach and late coffee. He passed 2 nurses. Neither looked up. His steps echoed down the corridor, sharp, practiced, impatient. Room 312. His hand paused on the handle for half a second. Then he opened it and froze. Everything inside him stopped. The machines hummed. Faith lay still, a soft flush returning to her cheeks. But it wasn't the machines that caught his eye. It was Helen, sitting beside the bed, head bowed, sleeve rolled up, her arm hooked to a line that fed directly into the transfusion bag, blood flowing, her blood, into his daughter's veins. No doctors in the room, no announcement, no warning, just her, still, steady, silent, giving. He blinked once. The briefcase slid from his fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. Helen didn't look up. She was humming. A lullaby. So faint he almost thought he imagined it. The same song he'd heard Faith hum weeks ago while drawing, the one his wife used to sing. His chest tightened. Helen, he breathed, barely audible. She opened her eyes slowly. Didn't flinch. Didn't explain. Just met his gaze. And in that moment, she looked like someone who had already made peace with what she was doing, and didn't need permission to do it. Anthony stepped closer, slowly. a strange pressure building in his throat. Not anger, not confusion. Something older, something deeper. Guilt. He knelt down beside her without realizing. He wasn't a CEO now, not a billionaire, not a man used to control. Just a father, looking at the woman who was saving his child, without his knowledge, without his consent, without needing either. "You should have told me," he whispered. Helen didn't smile, didn't soften. She just shook her head gently. "You would have stopped me," he exhaled. His eyes dropped to the line in her arm. "You could have passed out. You could have—" "But I didn't," she said softly. A beat of silence. Then, "She needed blood. I had it. Like it was that simple. Like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything." The machines beeped softly behind them. Faith stirred slightly in her sleep, her small hand twitching toward the blanket. Helen reached over with her free hand and tucked it under gently. Anthony watched the gesture, and for the first time in a long time, he felt small, not worthless, not weak, just small, in the presence of something bigger than money, bigger than titles. Grace. He stood up slowly. There were no more words. He looked at Helen again. This woman who had walked his halls quietly for years, who had done the dishes, turned down beds, washed laundry, and now, without asking, had given his daughter a chance to live. He stepped out into the hallway. He didn't cry, not yet, but his throat burned, and something inside his chest shifted, like stone moving for the first time in years. He didn't go to the nurses, didn't call his assistant, didn't draft a plan. He sat down on a bench outside the room and let himself feel it. Not all of it. Not yet. But enough. Inside, Helen stayed with Faith, still connected, still humming. And outside, for the first time since his wife died, Anthony Gibson sat still long enough to listen to something he didn't know how to name. Helen stood in the hospital hallway, her sleeve down now, her hands tucked quietly in front of her. The transfusion had ended 20 minutes ago. The nurse had unhooked her gently, offered water and rest. Helen had nodded, said thank you, and sat for a few minutes. Long enough to be polite, not long enough to worry anyone. She didn't want attention. She just wanted Faith to be okay. Now she stood outside the room, waiting for nothing in particular, just being there. Her eyes, tired but steady, drifted toward the floor tiles. She traced the grout lines with her gaze, like they were roads going somewhere quiet. Then she felt it, the presence beside her. Anthony. He hadn't said a word since he walked out. Now he stood just a few feet away, arms crossed, back pressed to the opposite wall, like the weight of everything he couldn't say was holding him there. For a long moment they didn't look at each other, just silence, heavy, personal, close. Finally his voice came, low, tight, like it hurt to let the words out. "You didn't ask me." Helen didn't move. "No. You should have." Her eyes lifted now. Calm. Not cold, but calm in a way that didn't beg to be understood. "She didn't have time for permission," she said. He looked at her. Really looked. There was no defiance in her face, no apology either. Just a quiet truth sitting between them, unshaken. Anthony exhaled hard, the kind of breath that comes when you don't know what to do with what you're feeling. "You could have passed out," he said. "Or worse. You don't get to just—" "I didn't do it for you," she said. Soft. But it landed. He went still. Her voice didn't rise. It stayed steady, steady like she had been beside Faith for months now. Steady like someone who had already settled her soul long before anyone else caught up. "She's a child," Helen continued, "and she needed help, that's all." Anthony's jaw clenched. Not in anger, in shame. He had read every study, flown to every expert, bought more solutions than most families could dream of. But the one thing that saved his daughter came from the woman he barely noticed. The woman whose name he said only when something needed fixing. And here she was. already fixed the most important thing. Without him. That stung in places he didn't know he still had. He pressed a hand to the bridge of his nose. "Do you know what would have happened if you collapsed? If something went wrong?" Helen's answer came without hesitation. "I would have bled out loving somebody," she said. That silenced him. She wasn't emotional when she said it. No tears, no drama. But Anthony's chest tightened anyway, because it wasn't the words that got him. It was how true they were. They both stood there, the hum of hospital lights above them. Down the hall, a janitor pushed a mop bucket. A nurse gave someone directions to radiology. The world moved on, like nothing sacred had just happened here. Anthony glanced back toward the room. "Why didn't you tell them to call me?" he asked quietly. Helen hesitated this time. Then, "Because you would have made it about rules, about risk, about policy." He didn't argue. She stepped toward him then, just a little, enough that he could see the softness return to her voice. "But for her, it wasn't about any of that," she said. "It was about time, and whether she'd live long enough to wait for another match." Her voice cracked slightly on that word, wait, not enough to be dramatic, just enough to be human. Anthony looked away. His eyes burned, but he wouldn't cry. Not here. Not yet. She turned, about to leave, but he spoke again, this time softer. "I didn't know you were O-negative." Helen stopped, looked over her shoulder. "You never asked." She walked down the hallway, not fast, not slow, and Anthony stayed where he was, still pressed to the wall. He didn't follow. But for the first time he watched her go, not as a maid, not as an employee, but as a woman who had done what he couldn't. She had given blood, but she'd also given truth, and now he would have to sit with it. The house had been too quiet since the hospital. Anthony could feel it in the walls, the stillness after something sacred had happened. It wasn't the same kind of silence as before, not the cold, empty kind that had followed his wife's passing. This was different. This was the kind of silence that made space for something new. Faith had returned home the next evening, weak but stronger. She slept deeply, her breathing soft, her body slowly receiving what it had been missing. Helen stayed nearby, not hovering, just present, the same way she always had been. But now, Anthony saw it, every detail. The way she folded Faith's blankets as if she were tucking in something fragile. The way she moved through the rooms like she knew their rhythm better than anyone else. The way she whispered prayers when she thought no one was listening. He noticed, and it unsettled him. Not because it was wrong, because it had been there all along, and he'd missed it. 3 days later, it happened. An email. Subject line: urgent. Story leak. Boston General. Anthony opened it, eyes skimming fast. An anonymous hospital source had spoken to a reporter. The story had already gone to press. Billionaire's housekeeper donates rare blood to save his daughter's life. No names, no photos, but it wouldn't take long for people to connect the dots. He sat back in his chair, stared at the screen. He felt it then, not anger, not even fear, exposure. This had been holy, quiet, a moment that wasn't meant for headlines. But now, the world would try to take it, twist it, monetize it. His phone rang 2 minutes later. PR director. "We can spin this," she said, almost cheerfully. "Turn it into a brand story. Heroism, humility, corporate empathy." "No," Anthony said flatly. A pause. "Sir?" "I said no. This isn't ours to use." He ended the call and stood up slowly. Walked out of the office, down the corridor past framed degrees and polished glass. The house didn't feel like a house anymore. It felt like a place where truth had finally arrived. And he didn't know how to sit with it. He found Helen in the side garden, kneeling by the edge of a raised flower bed. It was where she liked to be when the house got too loud. The hydrangeas were fading with the season. She pulled at the weeds with care, pressing the soil back into place with both palms, like she needed to feel something grounded. He stood there for a moment before speaking. "It's out," he said. Helen looked up slowly. "They leaked it," he continued. "Someone at the hospital." She didn't react, not with fear, not with surprise. "I thought they might," she said softly. He stepped closer. "They want to use you," he said. "Turn you into a headline, a strategy, a symbol." "I'm none of those," she replied. "I know." A beat. "I told them no," he added. "I told them this wasn't a campaign. This wasn't yours to give away." Helen stood then, brushing her hands clean. Their eyes met. Not like employee and employer, but like two people holding the weight of something unspoken between them. "It wasn't supposed to be seen," she said. "It wasn't meant for cameras." He nodded. "But I saw it." Another pause. Gentle. "That's the only part that matters to me," she whispered. Something in his chest cracked at that, like a door that had been closed too long, finally letting air in. Back inside, Faith was awake. She was coloring on the floor, wrapped in a blanket. Beside her, a drawing, 3 stick figures under a crooked roof. One taller, one small, one with curls. He picked it up. Above the roof, Faith had written just one word. Home. Anthony stood there for a while. The world outside was buzzing. The media would move fast. But in this house, something holy had taken root. Not because of wealth, not because of effort, but because one woman gave quietly and taught him how to see. It was late, the kind of quiet that only comes after everyone else has gone to sleep. The lights in the hallway were dimmed. Faith was finally resting, a soft rhythmic breath rising beneath her blanket, her favorite dolphin tucked close to her chest. Anthony stood in the doorway of the kitchen. He didn't announce himself. Helen was at the counter pouring water into the kettle. She moved like someone who belonged there, not with authority, but with familiarity, like this space had learned her rhythm over time. He watched her for a moment, not because he meant to intrude, but because he wasn't ready to speak yet. There was something in the air, not heavy, but not light, something waiting. She turned slightly, sensing him. "You want tea?" she asked, without looking directly at him. He stepped in. "Sure." The kettle hissed gently behind her. She reached for 2 mugs, simple, chipped at the rim, not the kind of cups that were displayed in formal cabinets. These were real, used, trusted. Anthony sat at the small table in the corner. He hadn't sat there in months, maybe years. Not since before his wife got sick. Not since this house became a museum of survival instead of a place to live. Helen handed him a mug. She didn't sit, not yet. Just leaned against the counter, holding her own tea, both hands wrapped around it. He took a slow sip, and then the words came. Quiet, but not unsure. "You've been raising her, haven't you?" She didn't flinch. He looked up. "All this time I thought I was doing enough, paying the right people, building the right structure, keeping things in place." His voice cracked slightly. "But you've been the one actually loving her." Helen set her tea down gently. She still didn't sit. "She's easy to love," she said. He nodded, looked down at his mug. "I don't know when I stopped showing up," he said. "Maybe it was after Claire. Maybe it was before that." His voice faded. The kettle clicked off behind them. Helen finally moved, pulled out the chair across from him, sat down. "I don't blame you," she said softly, "for grieving the way you did." Anthony met her eyes. "But Faith needed you," she added. "Not your money, not your plans, you." The silence between them thickened, not in tension, but in truth. It filled the room like warm air. He looked away. "I didn't think I had anything left to give." Helen's hand stayed wrapped around her cup. "You do," she said. "You just forgot how to give it." There it was, the break, not loud, not sharp, but it split something open in him, something he hadn't let anyone touch. He set his mug down, pressed a hand to his eyes. He didn't sob, didn't fall apart, but the stillness in his chest, the wall he'd built around his grief, cracked. He exhaled slowly, like releasing something he'd carried too long. Helen waited. Not to be thanked, not to be seen, just waited, and then he spoke again. "I've been trying to fix everything," he whispered, "with control, with strategy. But she's still sick, and I'm still lost." Helen leaned forward slightly. "Then stop fixing. Start feeling." He looked up, surprised. "That's harder," he admitted. "I know," she said, "but it's the only thing she needs from you now." A silence settled between them, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like honesty. For the first time in years, Anthony wasn't giving orders, and Helen wasn't just following them. They were just two people, sharing a table, a burden, and something that felt like trust. He reached into his coat pocket then, placed a manila envelope on the table. "I had legal draft this earlier," he said. "It's a compensation package, bonuses, full benefits, paid leave, private health care for life." She stared at it, didn't touch it. "I don't need this," she said. Anthony blinked. "What do you need?" he asked. Helen's eyes softened. "For her to stay alive," she said quietly, "and for you to see her." The tea between them went cold, because something sacred had passed across that table. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close. The next morning, the house didn't feel different, not to anyone else. The windows still framed the trees the same way. The cook still unpacked groceries at 7 a.m. sharp. The cleaning crew still arrived just before the gardener's truck pulled up. But something under the surface had shifted, like the floor had moved a fraction in the night, just enough to make you feel it in your step. Faith was awake early, propped up by pillows, a blanket pulled to her chin, coloring a new page. Dolphins again. Helen had made oatmeal the way she always did. Almond milk, bananas, mashed so she wouldn't have to chew, a pinch of cinnamon. But this morning she didn't leave the tray on the table. She carried it in, sat beside Faith, watched her eat. Faith didn't say much. She didn't have to. When a child feels safe, their silence sounds different. It was the silence of someone being seen. Anthony stood just outside the doorway. He didn't walk in. He just watched. He saw the way Faith leaned into Helen's side as she colored. The way Helen smoothed her hair back like it was second nature. It was second nature. And for the first time, he didn't feel pushed out by that. He felt invited. Later that afternoon, he found himself walking toward the nursery. No phone, no meeting agenda. Just him. The room still smelled faintly like lavender and warm wood. Helen had opened the window just enough to let the breeze in. Soft music played from a little speaker on the dresser. Faith was asleep again. A half-finished drawing lay on the rug beside her. Anthony picked it up. 3 stick figures again, this time under a sun with long, stretching rays, the same roof over all of them. He stared at the picture longer than he meant to, and when he placed it back down, he did so gently as like it mattered. Because it did. He found Helen later in the laundry room, folding towels, a basket beside her. He stood in the doorway. She noticed him, nodded once, and kept folding. He didn't speak right away. He didn't know how to. There was nothing urgent to say. No task, no correction, no performance, just presence. And somehow that felt harder. "How's she doing?" he asked. Helen folded another towel, neatly, precisely. She smiled when the music came on, she said. "First time in a week." Anthony exhaled, slowly. "I want to learn," he said. She looked up now. "Learn what?" He swallowed. "How to be here, like you've been." Helen didn't answer, not right away. She set the towel down, met his eyes. "Then start," she said. And then she left him there, not unkindly, just honestly. That evening, the table was set for 3, not just for tradition, but because Faith had asked. "Can Helen sit with us tonight?" she whispered. "Like real dinner?" Anthony didn't hesitate. He nodded. Helen served the food, but she didn't return to the kitchen. She took a seat. Faith grinned like it was the most normal thing in the world. The meal was quiet. No toasts, no speeches, just shared bites. A few questions about dolphins, a joke about too much pepper in the soup. At one point, Anthony reached to pass the bread. Their hands brushed. Neither pulled back too quickly. It wasn't a moment meant for words, but something passed between them. Something that said, "We're trying now." And for the first time, the silence in that house, it didn't feel like absence, it felt like peace. They didn't say the word family that night. They didn't have to. Because something in the way Faith leaned her head on Helen's shoulder after dinner, and the way Anthony didn't look away, said it already lived here. It came in a plain envelope, no warning, no ceremony. Just a quiet thud on Anthony's desk late one morning. Hospital letterhead stamped in the corner, neatly folded inside a single page. In preparation for public clarification and internal review regarding the transfusion, please approve the following statement. He read the draft once, then again. His jaw tightened on the second line. The child received an emergency blood donation from an internal support staff member. Due to protocol, the identity and role of said donor will remain confidential. He stared at that word, support staff. That's what they called her. The woman who had given her blood to save his child, who had shown up before the doctors before him. Support staff. He didn't sign it. Instead, he picked up the phone. "Get me the hospital director," he said. "Now." That afternoon, the boardroom smelled like lemon polish and printer ink. 3 executives sat across from him, folders in hand. They welcomed him with tight smiles, told him how grateful they were for his cooperation, how delicately they planned to handle the media spin. Anthony said nothing. He pulled the statement from his coat pocket and set it on the table. "Is this how you want the story told?" he asked, voice calm but cold. "Respectfully," one of them said, "we're protecting privacy. It's standard language. We're calling her a staff member, so it doesn't trigger legal questions about risk or liability." "She's not a category," Anthony replied. "She's a person." Another executive cleared his throat. "With public pressure growing, we're trying to minimize exposure." Anthony leaned forward. "I told you I'd walk if you tried to reduce her to a footnote." A pause. The room shifted. "Then what do you want it to say?" someone finally asked. Anthony looked up. "I want it to say the truth." That night, Helen was in the study, organizing Faith's art supplies. The crayons had been scattered across the floor, drawings half finished, suns with long arms, smiling stick figures that barely stayed inside the lines. She didn't notice Anthony at first. Not until he set the envelope on the table beside her, she glanced at it. "What's this?" "A rewritten statement," he said. "I didn't sign the other one." Helen hesitated. "You didn't have to do that." "I did." He sat on the edge of the armrest, not too close. "I'm done letting other people define what matters in my house." She looked at him, guarded, soft. "They'll still try," she said. "They'll call it charity or spin or feel-good fluff." "Let them try," he said. "But we'll write the truth." Helen picked up the letter. Read the new words slowly. On October 5th, during a critical medical emergency, a woman named Helen Jackson, who has served our home not just with professionalism, but with heart, made a personal sacrifice that saved my daughter's life. This was not procedure. This was not protocol. This was love. And we will not let it go unnamed. Her hand paused over the last line. "She didn't save my child as a staff member. She saved her as a human being." She folded the paper slowly, not tightly, then placed it back on the table like it was something that belonged. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The light from the floor lamp washed the room in a kind of hush, not silence, but the kind of quiet that waits for something holy. Then Anthony stood. "I'd like you to be there when I sign it officially." Helen looked up. "Why?" "Because it's your name on the line." She gave a small smile. Not wide, but real. "All right," she said. Later that evening, Faith sat curled up on the living room couch, drawing again. This time, she was working on a new picture. A house, colored in soft yellow with windows this time. 3 figures beneath it. One tall, one smaller, one in a red dress. And just above the door, written in blocky crayon letters, "The truth lives here." Outside, the sky was starting to clear, not fully, just enough to see the first stars. And inside that house, and for the first time in years, every person inside was seen. It was a Tuesday. Nothing extraordinary about the day. The sun came up slow over the trees behind the Gibson estate. The city beyond was already humming. Delivery trucks, crosswalk signals, early alarms no one thanked. Inside the house, the kitchen light had been on since 6:30. Helen stood at the stove stirring oatmeal. Not because she had to, not because it was her shift, because Faith was home, and she liked it warm. Anthony entered the kitchen just as she was slicing the bananas, half a second too late to offer help. She glanced at him, offered a nod. No words yet. They didn't always need words anymore. He reached for the bowls. That morning they moved around each other like people who had known one another longer than the titles on their paperwork suggested. Not family, not quite friends, but something chosen. Something that had survived the worst of life and quietly decided to stay. Faith came in moments later, barefoot, hair messy from sleep, her dolphin toy tucked beneath one arm. She climbed into her chair with no urgency, no complaint, just the ease of a child who knew she belonged. Helen set her bowl down first. Anthony followed. He sat too. And they ate, not with formality, but with familiarity. Not with noise, but with presence. After breakfast, Faith wandered off to the family room, a stack of crayons in her hand. Anthony stood, began clearing dishes. Helen moved to wipe the counter. "I spoke to the hospital," he said. "They approved the new statement. It goes public next week." Helen didn't stop wiping, but he saw her shoulders soften. "You didn't have to keep pushing," she said. "I wasn't pushing," he replied. "I was protecting." A pause. "I'm learning," he added. She turned to face him now, folded the cloth. "I can see that." That afternoon, Faith taped something to the fridge. No announcement. No, "Look what I made." She just walked over, placed it there with 2 magnets, and went back to the living room. Anthony walked into the kitchen later and saw it, a hand-drawn picture, a house with 3 figures, one tall, in a suit, one small, with curls and a dolphin in her hand, and one in a red dress with a warm smile and kind eyes. The names were scribbled above their heads. Me, Daddy, Helen. But what stopped him wasn't the figures. It was the word written just above the roof, in careful block letters. Home. He stood there longer than he meant to. His hand rested on the fridge door, but he didn't open it. He just looked. And for a brief moment, his throat tightened, not with grief, but with recognition. Because somewhere between blood transfusions and quiet meals, between hospital chairs and early mornings, something had happened. Not loudly, not suddenly, but faithfully. They had become something that couldn't be named in legal documents or medical reports, something that couldn't be bought or scheduled or delegated. Family, not by title, but by choice. That night, they all sat at the same table again. No staff lines, no roles, just people. Helen brought dessert, banana bread, still warm, a little uneven around the edges. Faith giggled at the shape of it. Anthony took a bite, closed his eyes for a second longer than necessary. It wasn't the food. It was the quiet, the safety, the grace of it all. No one said thank you. They didn't need to. Some gifts aren't meant to be thanked for. They're meant to be honored, lived, and protected. Later, long after Faith had fallen asleep, Anthony passed by the kitchen one last time. The light was still on, the drawing still on the fridge. He paused, touched the corner of the paper gently with his fingertips, then whispered, not loudly, not to anyone, just to the room, "Thank you." And for the first time in a very long time, he meant it. He cried every single night, and nobody knew he was dying. Jason was 1 year old, and he was in pain. Not the kind of pain you can see in an X-ray or catch with a test, the kind that lives in a baby's body, silent and slow, twisting his spine a little more each day, while the people around him, his father, his nanny, his doctors, saw nothing. He lived in a $15 million mansion in San Francisco, floor-to-ceiling windows, designer furniture, everything perfect. Except the baby, His father, Leonard, couldn't look at him. Grief over his dead wife had swallowed him whole, and every time he saw Jason's face, he saw her, so he stopped looking. The nanny, Mrs. Brennan, had 30 years of experience and zero patience. To her, Jason's crying was just noise, something to manage, something to ignore. The pediatrician had been called, once, maybe twice, but no one followed up. And Jason, he kept crying, kept hurting, kept waiting for someone to notice. Then Tracy walked in. She wasn't supposed to see anything. She was just there to clean, stay quiet, stay invisible. She had a sick son at home and bills she couldn't pay. She needed this job more than she needed to be right. But one afternoon, when no one was watching, she picked Jason up, and she felt it. Something wrong, something terrible. Then she saw the mark on his leg, and everything made sense. But knowing the truth and speaking it, those are two very different things. Especially when the people who don't want to hear it have all the power, and you have nothing but your voice. Before we begin, like this video, hit subscribe, and tell me where in the world you're watching from, because sometimes the people who see the truth aren't the ones with the most power, they're the ones who care enough to look. Tracy's first morning started the way most of her mornings did, early, tired, and worried about money. She pulled into the driveway just after 7. The house looked even bigger in the daylight. All that glass, all that space. She sat in her car for a moment, staring up at it, trying to calm the nerves in her stomach. You need this job. Don't mess it up. Inside, everything was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that feels like it's waiting for something to break. She started in the kitchen, wiping down counters that were already spotless. Then, the living room, the windows. Moving carefully, trying not to make too much noise. That's when she heard it. Crying, soft at first, coming from somewhere upstairs. Tracy paused, her hand still on the window she'd been cleaning. She listened. The crying didn't stop. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was just sad. The kind of sad that makes your chest hurt. She kept working, telling herself it wasn't her business. Babies cry. That's normal. But 20 minutes passed, then 30, and the crying didn't stop. Tracy moved closer to the staircase, her heart beating a little faster. She could hear Mrs. Brennan upstairs now, moving around, opening drawers, her voice sharp through the walls. Jason, enough. You're fine. The baby's crying got louder. Desperate. I said enough. Tracy's hands tightened around the cleaning cloth. A few minutes later, Mrs. Brennan came downstairs carrying Jason. The baby's face was red and puffy from crying. His little body was stiff, tilted to one side in a way that didn't look right. The nanny set him down in a playpen near the window and walked away without a word. Jason whimpered, tried to move, winced. Tracy watched from across the room, her chest tight. Something's wrong with him. That evening, Leonard came home. He walked through the front door like a ghost, jacket slung over one shoulder, eyes distant. He didn't say hello, didn't ask about his son. He just headed straight for his office. Mr. Turner, Mrs. Brennan called after him. Jason's been fussy again today. Should I? Handle it, Leonard said without turning around. That's your job. The office door closed. Tracy stood frozen in the hallway, a vacuum in her hand, watching the man disappear. She looked over at the playpen. Jason sat there, quiet now. Not because he felt better, because he'd given up. And something inside Tracy shifted. She thought about Malik, about all the times she'd stayed up with him when he was sick, refusing to sleep until she knew he was okay. But this wasn't her child. This wasn't her house. And if she stepped out of line, the crying started again. Louder this time. Mrs. Brennan sighed from the kitchen, pulled out her earbuds, and started walking toward the playpen. Tracy watched her pick Jason up, not gently, not carefully, just efficiently, like he was laundry that needed folding. You're going to bed early tonight, the nanny muttered. I've had enough of this. She carried him upstairs. The crying continued. Muffled now, behind a closed door. Tracy stood at the bottom of the stairs, her heart pounding in her ears. She shouldn't follow. She shouldn't care. She shouldn't risk everything for a baby that wasn't hers. But her feet were already moving. One step, then another. And by the time she reached the top of the stairs, she could hear Mrs. Brennan's voice coming from the nursery, cold and clipped. Stay in the crib. I don't want to hear another sound. The door opened. Mrs. Brennan stepped out, and she saw Tracy standing there in the hallway. The two women stared at each other in the hallway. Mrs. Brennan's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing up here?" Tracy's mouth went dry. I heard crying. I thought maybe—" "You thought what?" The nanny's voice was ice. "That you'd interfere? Check on a child that isn't your concern? I just wanted to make sure he was okay." Mrs. Brennan stepped closer, her face tight with something that looked like anger but felt more like fear. "Let me be very clear with you, Tracy. I have been caring for children since before you were born. I know what I'm doing. Jason is fine. He's a fussy baby. Some children are just like that, but he seems like he's in pain. You're the cleaning woman." Each word came out sharp, deliberate. "You clean floors. You don't diagnose children. Do you understand me?" Tracy nodded, her heart pounding. "Good." Mrs. Brennan brushed past her toward the stairs. "I suggest you remember your place. Mr. Turner doesn't tolerate overstepping, and neither do I." Tracy stood alone in the hallway, her hands shaking. Behind the nursery door, Jason had gone quiet. Not peaceful quiet, exhausted quiet. She wanted to go in, wanted to check on him, but her feet wouldn't move. "You need this job. You can't afford to lose it." The next morning, Tracy arrived early again, hoping to avoid Mrs. Brennan, but the house felt different somehow, heavier. As she cleaned the living room, she noticed things she hadn't seen before. Framed photos on the mantel, a beautiful woman with dark hair and a bright smile, holding a newborn baby. Leonard standing beside her, his arm around her waist, actually smiling. The woman was in every photo, some alone, some with Leonard, some just her hand resting on her pregnant belly. Maria, Jason's mother. Tracy picked up one of the frames to dust beneath it. The photo showed Maria in the nursery, painting the walls, laughing at the camera. She did all of it herself. Tracy jumped, nearly dropping the frame. Leonard stood in the doorway. She hadn't heard him come in. "I'm sorry, Mr. Turner. I was just—" "She designed the whole nursery," he continued, his voice distant. "Picked out every piece of furniture, every toy, even the crib bumpers." His jaw tightened. It was the last thing she finished before the accident. Tracy carefully set the frame back down. "I'm very sorry for your loss." Leonard didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at the photo, his face empty. Then he turned and walked away. Tracy watched him go, her chest aching. This wasn't just a rich man ignoring his child. This was a man so broken by grief that he couldn't bear to see his own son, couldn't bear to enter the nursery his wife had made, couldn't bear to be a father because being a father meant remembering he was also a widower. And somewhere in the middle of all that pain, a baby was suffering. That afternoon, Tracy was cleaning near the playpen when Jason started crying again. She glanced toward the kitchen. Mrs. Brennan was on the phone, her back turned. Tracy knelt down beside the playpen. "Hey, little one," she whispered. Jason looked at her, his eyes red and swollen. He didn't reach for her, didn't smile, just watched her with that same heartbreaking resignation. Tracy's throat tightened. She reached through the bars and gently touched his hand. Jason flinched. Not from fear, from pain. And that's when Tracy saw it clearly for the first time. The way his shoulder sat higher on one side, the way his back curved when he tried to sit up, the way moving at all seemed to hurt. "What are you doing?" Tracy spun around. Mrs. Brennan stood behind her, her face dark with anger. "I told you not to touch him." "I wasn't." "Get your things. You're done for the day." Tracy stood slowly, her heart racing. "Mrs. Brennan, please. I think something's really wrong with—" "Out. Now." Tracy grabbed her supplies and headed for the door, her hands shaking so hard she could barely hold on to anything. But as she reached her car, she looked back at the house, at the windows, the perfection, the wealth, and somewhere inside, a baby crying that no one wanted to hear. Tracy sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel. She thought about Malik waiting for her at home, about her mama, about the bills on her kitchen counter, about everything she'd lose if she pushed this. Then she thought about Jason's eyes, and she knew she was already in too deep to walk away. Day 3. Tracy almost didn't come back, but she needed the money, so she showed up. Mrs. Brennan met her at the door. "Main floor only today. Stay downstairs." "Yes, ma'am." The nanny went upstairs with Jason, and within minutes, the crying started. Tracy scrubbed the kitchen counters, trying to ignore it, but the sound wouldn't stop. 20 minutes, 30, 45. She could hear Mrs. Brennan moving around upstairs, completely unfazed. "Jason, enough. You're fine." But he wasn't fine. Tracy gripped the sponge tighter, her chest burning. Around noon, Mrs. Brennan grabbed her purse. "I'm going out for lunch. Don't go upstairs." The door closed. Tracy stood alone in the quiet house, her heart pounding. She knew she shouldn't, but she couldn't stop herself. She climbed the stairs, pushed open the nursery door, and stepped inside. Jason lay in his crib, awake, staring at nothing. His face was red and swollen. His body curved to the side in a way that made her stomach twist. Tracy knelt beside him. "Hey, baby." He looked at her with those tired, heartbroken eyes. She pulled out her phone and searched. "Baby won't sit straight. Infant spinal problems." The results made her hands shake. If caught early, treatable. If left untreated, permanent damage. She heard the front door open downstairs. Tracy jumped up, slipped out of the nursery, and rushed back to the kitchen just as Mrs. Brennan walked in. The nanny's eyes narrowed. "Where were you?" "Finishing the living room," Tracy said, forcing her voice steady. Mrs. Brennan didn't look convinced. That evening, Leonard came home. Tracy was cleaning the entryway when he walked past her, phone pressed to his ear. She took a breath. "Mr. Turner?" He stopped, irritation flashing across his face. "What?" It's about Jason. I think he needs to see a doctor. His back doesn't look right." "Mrs. Brennan handles Jason's care." Leonard cut her off, his voice cold. "She's been doing this for 30 years. If something was wrong, she'd know. But what if she's missing something? Tracy." He stepped closer, his jaw tight. "You're not paid to diagnose my son. You're paid to clean. Do your job, or I'll find someone who will." He walked away. Tracy stood there, her throat burning, tears stinging her eyes. She was nobody, just the help. And he was a man with all the power in the world. That night, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone. On the screen, a number for Child Protective Services. Her finger hovered over it. If she called, she could lose everything. But if she didn't, she thought about Jason's face. That curve in his spine, permanent damage if left untreated. Tomorrow, Mrs. Brennan had a doctor's appointment. She'd be gone for hours. Tomorrow, Tracy would be alone with Jason. And maybe that was her one chance. Even if it cost her everything. Her phone buzzed. A text from Malik's school. Reminder, medication, refill needed by Friday. Tracy closed her eyes. She couldn't afford to lose this job. But she couldn't afford to stay silent either. Tomorrow, she'd have to choose. Friday morning, Mrs. Brennan was waiting by the door when Tracy arrived. "I have an appointment. I'll be back in 2 hours, maybe 3. Tracy's pulse quickened. "Should I?" "Jason's in his playpen. Keep him there. Don't pick him up. Don't feed him. Just leave him alone and do your work." The nanny's eyes were sharp. "Are we clear?" "Yes, ma'am." The door closed. Silence. Tracy stood in the entryway, her heart pounding in her ears. She was alone. With Jason. For the first time all week, she could actually help him, actually see what was wrong. But Mrs. Brennan's warning echoed in her head. "Don't touch him." Tracy walked into the living room. Jason sat in the playpen, quiet, his small body tilted to the side. When he saw her, he didn't smile, didn't cry, just watched her with those sad, knowing eyes. She knelt beside the playpen. "Hey, sweetheart." Jason blinked slowly. Tracy's hands trembled. "I'm going to help you, okay? I promise." She lifted him carefully out of the playpen. The second her hands touched him, she felt it. His body was rigid, tense, like every muscle was bracing for pain. "Oh, baby," she whispered, cradling him close. "What's been happening to you?" She carried him upstairs to the nursery. Her heart hammered with every step. Inside, she laid him gently on the changing table and began examining him the way she'd learned years ago during her nursing assistant training. His spine curved when he lay flat. His left shoulder sat higher than his right, and when she carefully tried to straighten him, he whimpered. Tracy's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She looked at the crib. The expensive bumpers, the designer bedding, everything Maria had chosen before she died. Then she noticed it. One section of the bumper had come loose from its ties. It was bunched up thick on the left side, creating a wall. Tracy's breath caught. If a baby slept against that every night, his body would have to curve to fit. His leg would press against it for hours, months. She lifted Jason again and gently examined his left leg. There, just above the ankle, a dark mark, deep, old, the kind that comes from constant pressure over time. Tracy's hands shook as the pieces fell into place. This baby had been sleeping in the same twisted position for months, and his soft, growing bones had been adapting, curving, compensating. "Oh God," she breathed. "Nobody's been checking on you at night." She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and started taking photos. The crib, the bunched bumper, Jason's curved spine, the mark on his leg. Evidence. She heard a car door slam outside. Tracy's heart stopped. She looked out the window. Mrs. Brennan was back early. Tracy quickly put Jason back in the playpen, shoved her phone in her pocket, and grabbed her cleaning supplies. The front door opened. "Tracy." Mrs. Brennan's voice was cold. "I'm here," Tracy called out, her voice shaking. The nanny appeared in the doorway, her eyes scanning the room. Then they landed on Jason. He was facing the wrong direction in the playpen. Mrs. Brennan's face darkened. "You touched him. I told you not to touch him." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to something dangerous. "What were you doing up here?" Tracy's mind raced. "I heard him crying." "Lying won't help you." Mrs. Brennan pulled out her phone. "I'm calling Mr. Turner. You're done." "Wait." "No. You've crossed the line for the last time." Tracy stood frozen as the nanny dialed. In her pocket, her phone felt like it was burning a hole through her jeans. She had the evidence. She had proof. But in 30 seconds, Leonard Turner was going to fire her. And once she was gone, no one would ever look at that crib again. No one would ever see what she saw. Jason would keep sleeping in that position, keep crying in pain, until the damage became permanent. Tracy's hands curled into fists. She had one choice left, and she had about 10 seconds to make it. "Mr. Turner? It's Mrs. Brennan. We have a problem." Tracy watched the nanny pace the living room, phone pressed to her ear. "The cleaning woman has been interfering with Jason. I've warned her multiple times, but she won't listen. She was upstairs in the nursery when I explicitly told her not to be." Silence. Then Mrs. Brennan's voice turned colder. "I think it's best if we let her go. Today." Tracy's stomach dropped. Mrs. Brennan hung up. "Mr. Turner will be home in 20 minutes. You can wait outside." "Please," Tracy said quietly. "Just let me explain." "There's nothing to explain. You don't follow instructions. You overstep. And frankly, I don't trust you." The nanny walked away, leaving Tracy standing alone in the middle of the house. 20 minutes. That's all she had. Tracy looked at Jason in the playpen. He was watching her, his eyes tired and sad. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone and opened the photos she'd taken. The crib, the bunched bumper, the mark on Jason's leg. It wasn't enough. She needed more. She needed someone to believe her. Quickly, she opened her browser and searched. "Free legal help, low-income families." A number popped up. "Legal aid clinic." She dialed. "Legal aid services. How can I help you?" Tracy's voice trembled. "I need help. I work as a maid, and the baby in the house is being hurt. Not on purpose, but no one's seeing it. I have photos, but I'm about to lose my job, and I don't know what to do." The woman on the other end was calm. "Okay. Tell me what you've seen." Tracy explained everything. The crying, the curved spine, the crib bumper, the mark on Jason's leg. "Do you have medical documentation?" the woman asked. "No. I'm just the cleaning woman. I can't take him to a doctor without permission." "Then the photos help, but they're not enough to file a protective order. We'd need a doctor to confirm what you're seeing." Tracy's heart sank. "So I can't do anything?" "You can report it to Child Protective Services. They can investigate. But I need to be honest with you, without medical proof, and with the family having resources for lawyers, this could be difficult. What if I just took him to a hospital? Without parental consent? That's custodial interference. You could be arrested." Tracy closed her eyes. "So, I'm supposed to just watch him suffer?" The woman paused. "I didn't say that. I'm saying you need to be prepared for what might happen if you act. This family has power. You don't. That's the reality." Tracy heard a car pull into the driveway. "I have to go," she whispered. She hung up just as Leonard walked through the door. He looked exhausted, angry, broken. Mrs. Brennan appeared immediately. "Mr. Turner, thank you for coming. As I mentioned, Tracy has repeatedly—" "I know what you said." Leonard's voice was flat. He turned to Tracy. "Is it true? You went into the nursery after being told not to?" Tracy's throat was tight. "Yes." "Why?" "Because your son is in pain, and no one's listening to him." Leonard's jaw clenched. "Jason is fine. Mrs. Brennan has everything under control. He's not fine." Tracy's voice broke. "His spine is curving. There's a mark on his leg from sleeping in the same position every night. The crib bumper is bunched up, and it's hurting him." Mrs. Brennan's face went red. "That's absurd." "It's the truth," Tracy said, her eyes locked on Leonard. "And if you don't believe me, just look at him. Really, look at him." Leonard stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he turned toward the playpen, walked over slowly, looked down at his son. Jason sat there, his little body tilted, his face tired and sad. For a long moment, Leonard just stared. Then he looked back at Tracy, his eyes filled with something she couldn't name. "Get out," he said quietly. Tracy's heart shattered. "Mr. Turner," I said, "get out." Mrs. Brennan smiled, and Tracy realized she'd just lost everything. But as she walked toward the door, phone heavy in her pocket, one thought burned through her mind. She still had the photos. She still had the legal aid number, and she still had a choice to make. Tracy sat in her car outside the mansion, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. She'd been fired. It was over. She pulled out her phone and stared at the photos of Jason, the bunched bumper, the mark on his leg, the curve in his spine. Then she looked at the legal aid number still open on her screen. Without medical proof, this could be difficult. You could be arrested. This family has power. You don't. Tracy's hands shook. She thought about Malik waiting for her at home, about her mama, about the bills she couldn't pay now that this job was gone. She thought about everything she'd just lost. Then she thought about Jason's eyes, and she made the call. "Child Protective Services, how can I help you?" Tracy's voice cracked. "I need to report a child in danger." Inside the mansion, Leonard stood at the window, watching Tracy's car in the driveway. "She's still out there," Mrs. Brennan said from behind him. "Should I call security?" Leonard didn't answer. He just stared. Mrs. Brennan crossed her arms. "I told you she was trouble. These people always overstep. They think because they clean your house, they have a right to." "Stop talking." The nanny's mouth snapped shut. Leonard turned and looked at Jason in the playpen. Really looked. The way the baby sat, the tilt in his body, the quiet, exhausted way he just existed. "When was the last time the pediatrician actually examined him?" Leonard asked quietly. Mrs. Brennan blinked. We had an appointment 3 months ago." "Did the doctor watch him sleep? Check his crib? Look at his positioning?" "Well, no. But did you mention the crying?" Mrs. Brennan's face flushed. "Children cry, Mr. Turner. It's normal. How much does he cry?" Silence. Leonard's voice dropped. "How much?" "He's fussier than most," Mrs. Brennan admitted. "But I've raised dozens of children. Some are just difficult." Leonard walked to the playpen and knelt down. Jason looked up at him with those same tired, sad eyes, and for the first time in 8 months, Leonard actually saw his son. Not Maria's baby, not a reminder of what he'd lost. His son, who was in pain. "Call the pediatrician," Leonard said, his voice shaking. "Now." Mrs. Brennan hesitated. "Mr. Turner, I really don't think—" "I said now." The nanny flinched, pulled out her phone, and dialed. Outside, Tracy was still on the phone with CPS. "A social worker will come by within 48 hours to assess the situation," the woman said. "But I need to warn you, if the family disputes your claims and you have no medical evidence, this could go nowhere." "I understand," Tracy whispered. "And if they pursue legal action against you for making a false report—" "It's not false. I believe you. But belief isn't proof." Tracy hung up and stared at the mansion. 48 hours. That's how long Jason had to wait. 48 more hours of pain, of crying, of no one really seeing him. Unless— Tracy looked at the hospital address she'd searched earlier on her phone. UCSF Medical Center, 15 minutes away. She looked at the house, at the window where Leonard stood. Then she looked at the clock. Mrs. Brennan's car was still in the driveway. Leonard's too. But in about an hour, Leonard always left for his afternoon meetings, and Mrs. Brennan always took her walk. 1 hour, one chance. Tracy closed her eyes and prayed for the first time in months. God, if you're listening, I need you to tell me what to do, because I don't know anymore. Her phone buzzed. A text from Malik. Love you, Mom. Hope work is good today. Tracy's eyes filled with tears. She looked at the house one more time. And then she made a decision that would either save a child's life or destroy her own. Tracy didn't go back to the mansion that day. She went home, held Malik, tried to pretend everything was fine. But that night, she couldn't sleep. She kept seeing Jason's face, that curve in his spine, the mark on his leg that told a story no one else wanted to read. Saturday morning, Malik wanted to go to the park. Tracy watched him run across the grass, his body moving freely, naturally. No pain, no stiffness, just a healthy 6-year-old being a kid. Jason couldn't do that. Jason could barely sit without hurting. Mama, why are you sad? Malik asked, running back to her. Tracy pulled him close. Just thinking about work, baby. Do you like your new job? She didn't know how to answer. Sunday, she visited her mama at the care home. Her mother took one look at her face and knew. What's wrong, baby girl? Tracy told her everything. The crying, the neglect, the evidence on her phone she was too scared to use. What do I do, Mama? If I speak up, I lose the job. We can't pay your bills, can't afford Malik's medicine. Her mother held her hand. I raised you to know the difference between the hard choice and the right choice. They're the same thing this time. They usually are. But you need this place. Malik needs his inhaler. We survived before this job, her mama said gently. We'll survive after. But baby, could you survive knowing you stayed silent while a child suffered? Would you want Malik growing up, thinking that's who his mama is? Tracy's eyes filled with tears. Her mother squeezed her hand. Some things matter more than money. You know that. That night, Tracy sat at her kitchen table, staring at the bills spread in front of her. Malik's prescription, $200. Her mama's care home, $3,500. Rent, $1,800. She couldn't afford any of it without that job, and she'd already lost it. So what did she have left to lose? She picked up her phone and opened the photos of Jason. Then she looked at the hospital address. Her hands trembled as she made a plan. Tomorrow was Monday. Leonard would be in his office all day. Mrs. Brennan would leave for her afternoon break. Tracy still had her keys to the house. She could go back, get Jason, take him to the hospital herself. It was insane, illegal, could get her arrested. But it might be the only way to save him. She thought about her mama's words. Could you survive, knowing you stayed silent? She thought about Malik, about the kind of person she wanted him to see when he looked at her. She thought about Jason crying alone in that crib, night after night, while his body slowly broke, and she knew what she had to do. Even if it destroyed her, even if she went to jail, even if she lost everything. Because some children don't have anyone else. And sometimes, God puts you in a place not because it's easy, but because you're the only one willing to see. Tracy set her alarm for 6 a.m. Tomorrow, she'd go back to that house one last time, and she'd walk out with Jason in her arms. Or she wouldn't walk out at all. Monday morning, 2 p.m. Tracy's hands shook as she turned the key in the lock. The house was quiet. Leonard's car was gone. Mrs. Brennan had left 10 minutes ago for her afternoon walk. Tracy stepped inside, her heart hammering so loud she could barely hear anything else. She climbed the stairs, pushed open the nursery door. Jason lay in his crib, awake, crying softly. When he saw her, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe even hope. I'm so sorry, baby, Tracy whispered, lifting him carefully. But I'm going to help you now, I promise. She wrapped him in a blanket, grabbed the diaper bag, and walked out. Her hands trembled the entire drive to the hospital. At UCSF Medical Center, Tracy walked straight to the emergency desk. This baby needs help. His spine is curving. There's a mark on his leg. He's been sleeping in a dangerous position for months. The nurse's eyes widened. Are you his mother? No, I was his caregiver. Please, just examine him. Within minutes, a doctor came, then another. They took Jason into an exam room, and then Hospital security arrived. "Ma'am, we need you to stay here. The baby's father has been contacted." Tracy's stomach dropped. "I can explain. You'll need to speak with the police. They're on their way." 20 minutes later, Leonard burst through the doors like a storm. His face was red, his eyes wild. "Where is my son? Where is she?" A police officer stepped forward. "Mr. Turner, your son is being examined, and this woman is being detained for custodial interference." Leonard's eyes found Tracy across the waiting room. The rage on his face made her knees weak. Then a doctor emerged, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a serious expression. "Mr. Turner, I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, pediatric orthopedist. We need to talk about your son." Leonard barely glanced at her. "I want her arrested. She took my child without permission." "Mr. Turner," Dr. Chen's voice was firm. "Please, sit down." Something in her tone made him stop. He sat. Dr. Chen pulled out a tablet showing x-rays. "Your son has positional plagiocephaly and developing scoliosis. His spine has been curving due to chronic pressure from sleeping in one position for an extended period." Leonard stared at the images. What are you saying?" "I'm saying this woman likely saved your son from needing surgery." Dr. Chen showed him photos. The crib bumper in his nursery had come loose and bunched up. It forced him to sleep on his right side every night. For months, his developing bones adapted to the restriction. She showed him the mark on Jason's leg. "This is from constant compression. If this had continued another few months, he would have needed spinal fusion, possibly braces for years." The color drained from Leonard's face. "But," the pediatrician said, "he was fine." "When was he last examined during sleep? When did anyone check his nighttime positioning?" Silence. Dr. Chen's voice softened. "Mr. Turner, this wasn't intentional harm, but it was neglect. And this woman," she gestured to Tracy, "she saw what everyone else missed." Leonard looked at Tracy, then at Jason, sleeping peacefully in the doctor's arms, finally comfortable for the first time in months. Then, his face crumpled. "Oh God," he whispered. "What have I done?" He buried his face in his hands, his whole body shaking. "I couldn't look at him. After Maria died, I couldn't. Every time I saw his face, I saw her, so I stopped looking." His voice broke. "And he was suffering, right in front of me, and I didn't see it." He looked up at Tracy, tears streaming down his face. "You tried to tell me. You risked everything to tell me. And I threatened you." Tracy's throat was tight. "I just wanted him to be okay." The police officer cleared his throat. "Mr. Turner, do you want to press charges?" Leonard stared at Tracy for a long moment. Then he stood and walked over to her. "No," he said quietly. "She saved my son's life." He turned to the officer. "I'm not pressing charges. She's a hero. And his voice cracked, "I'm the one who should be arrested." The charges were dropped that afternoon. Tracy sat in the hospital waiting room, exhausted, watching Leonard hold Jason for what seemed like the first time in months. The baby was calm, comfortable, finally seen. Dr. Chen explained the treatment plan. Physical therapy 3 times a week, special positioning for sleep, regular monitoring. With intervention now, he should recover fully within 6 to 8 months. Leonard's voice was barely a whisper. And if she hadn't brought him in? Surgery, bracing, possibly permanent complications. He closed his eyes, his son sleeping peacefully against his chest. Later, Leonard found Tracy in the hallway. "I don't know how to apologize for what I did to you." Tracy shook her head. "You were drowning. I understand grief. I couldn't watch Jason drown with you." Leonard's eyes filled. "I fired you, threatened you, and you still saved him. He's a baby. He needed someone. He needed his father." Leonard's voice cracked, and I wasn't there. Silence settled between them. Then Leonard spoke again. "Come back, not as a maid, as Jason's caregiver, someone who actually sees him." He paused. "Bring your son, your mother. I'll cover everything. Medical bills, school, whatever you need." Tracy stared at him. "Mr. Turner." "Leonard, please." His voice was raw. "I can't undo what I did, but I can make sure you never have to choose between doing right and surviving again." 3 months later, the mansion felt different. Warmer somehow. Tracy sat in the living room watching Malik and Jason play together on the floor. Jason's spine was straightening. His smile was real now, bright and beautiful. Her mother sat nearby reading a book, peaceful and cared for. Leonard came in from his office, something he did every hour now, checking on Jason, being present. "How's he doing?" Leonard asked, kneeling beside his son. "He's perfect," Tracy said softly. Jason reached for his father, and Leonard lifted him, holding him close. "I'm learning," Leonard whispered, "how to be his dad again, how to see him without only seeing her." "She'd be proud of you," Tracy said. Leonard's eyes glistened. "I think she'd be proud of you, for seeing what I was too broken to see." That evening, after the boys were asleep, Leonard found Tracy in the kitchen. "I started a foundation," he said quietly, "in Maria's name. Free medical screenings for families who can't afford them. So other children don't fall through the cracks." He paused. "I want you to run it." Tracy's breath caught. "Leonard, you saved my son by refusing to be invisible. Now help me make sure no child is invisible again." Tracy looked out the window at the bay, the sun setting gold and warm. She thought about her mama's words. The measure of a person isn't what they have, it's who they are, when no one's watching. She thought about that first day, hearing Jason cry, feeling small and powerless. And she thought about how God doesn't always call the powerful. Sometimes he calls the ones willing to see. "I'll do it," she whispered. Jason's laughter drifted from upstairs where Malik was reading him a story. And for the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel heavy. It felt like home. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the loudest truth. Sometimes the person with nothing has everything that matters. And sometimes, loving a child you didn't birth takes more courage than anything else in the world. If this story touched you, share it. Because somewhere, someone needs to hear it. Someone needs to know that speaking up even when you're scared, even when you're small, can change everything. Thank you for watching. And remember, you are seen, you are heard, and your voice matters more than you know. The safe's door gaped open like a dare. She froze in the silence. Her reflection in the steel glaring back. Was this trust or a trap? The morning sun spilled over the sprawling glass walls of Ward Estate, but its warmth never seemed to touch Ethan Ward. He sat at the head of a 12-foot mahogany table, a single plate in front of him. Untouched scrambled eggs, cooling toast, and coffee black enough to match the mood that clung to him like a second skin. His phone buzzed once, then again. Emails, stock updates, reminders from his assistant. He ignored them all. His gaze instead drifted to the far corner of the room, to the heavy vault door embedded in the wall. Polished steel, always locked, a silent witness to his life. Inside, millions sat in neatly banded stacks, symbols of success, symbols of protection, symbols of the fact that over the years you could never really trust anyone. Ethan had learned that the hard way, first from a business partner who siphoned funds from their company, then from a fiancée who had taken her ring and half his trust fund to start a new life somewhere sunny. People always had a price. Always. In another part of the city, Amara Johnson slipped into her crisp black uniform and knotted her hair into a bun so tight it pulled at her scalp. She left her tiny apartment with its flickering hallway light, locking the door behind her. The morning air smelled faintly of diesel and fried dough from the corner bakery. Amara worked 3 jobs, 2 part-time and 1 full-time, the latter being at Ward Estate. It paid better than most, but it came with the constant hum of being watched, weighed and judged, not by cameras necessarily, but by the eyes of wealth, which could be more cutting than any lens. She'd been at it for nearly 2 years, long enough to know Ethan's routines, his habits, even the way he set down his coffee cup with a controlled precision. He wasn't cruel, but there was a wall around him, a cold, impenetrable thing. And she'd learned to keep her own wall just as high. By the time she arrived at the estate, the sun was higher, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. The driveway was lined with imported maple trees whose leaves barely dared to fall out of place. She stepped inside through the service entrance, the faint scent of lemon polish and expensive cologne hitting her immediately. Marta, the cook, gave her a tired smile from the kitchen. "Morning, Amara." "He's in the dining room," Marta whispered, as though speaking too loudly might crack the fragile air of the house. Amara nodded, slipping past with the silent efficiency of someone used to being invisible. In the dining room, Ethan glanced up briefly as she entered, then back down at his phone. She set about her work, dusting shelves, straightening picture frames, running a cloth over the gleaming surface of the sideboard. If Ethan noticed the faint slump in her shoulders, he didn't show it. If Amara noticed the untouched breakfast, she didn't ask. They lived in a dance of polite detachment. She never lingered, he never pried. But today, as Ethan sipped his coffee, a thought formed in his mind, sharp, deliberate, and a little cruel. What if... He'd done it before, with contractors, assistants, even his own cousin once, leaving something valuable within reach to see what they'd do. A private test, a small thrill in a life otherwise sterile. He set his cup down, the faint click echoing in the stillness. "Amara," he said, his voice smooth but unreadable, "make sure the study gets extra attention today. I'll be out for a few hours." Her eyes flicked to his, then away. "Yes, sir." By noon, Ethan was gone, the low growl of his Aston Martin fading down the driveway. The house was quiet again, but not peaceful. In the study, Amara opened the double doors, inhaling the faint scent of leather and cedar from the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. She began dusting, starting with the top shelves, working her way down. And then she saw it, the safe. It was open, not wide, but just enough for the light to catch on what was inside. Bundles of cash, crisp and perfect, and a gleam of diamonds in a black velvet pouch. For a moment, she froze. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, each second dragging like a heavy chain. She stepped closer. Not because she wanted the money, God knew she didn't, but because her stomach tightened with something sharper than temptation. This was no accident. Someone like Ethan didn't forget to lock a safe. The insult settled over her like dust, fine, almost invisible, but impossible to ignore. Her reflection stared back at her in the steel door, eyes darker than usual, mouth pressed into a line. She took a deep breath, reached out, and with a firm but measured motion, pushed the door shut until it clicked. Then she turned away, her heart still tight in her chest. If someone you worked for tested your integrity without telling you, would you confront them, walk away, or prove them wrong in silence? Drop your answer in the comments. Let's talk trust. Ethan Ward sat in his car, engine idling in the private parking garage beneath his downtown office building, phone balanced in his palm. He wasn't checking emails. He wasn't reading market reports. Instead, he was streaming live footage from the estate's internal security system, a habit he'd never admit aloud. The grainy camera in the study captured Amara dusting the shelves, methodical as always. Then she reached the desk. The safe sat partially open, an invitation dressed as carelessness. Ethan leaned forward, thumb hovering over the pause button, as if that might still the moment. She stopped, looked. For a heartbeat, he swore she was going to reach inside. The tiniest movement of her hand toward the gap sent a jolt through him. Not excitement exactly, but something sharper, hungrier. Instead, she simply shut it. Firmly, deliberately. No hesitation. Ethan sat back, exhaling slowly. Huh. But it wasn't pride or relief flooding his chest. It was confusion. Her posture, straight-backed but heavy. Her face, impassive but shadowed. He'd seen enough people walk away from money to know the difference between indifference and insult. Amara wasn't unaffected. She was offended. Back at the estate, Amara carried on with her duties, each motion clipped, precise, like she was keeping herself from shattering something. She didn't linger in the study a second longer than necessary. When Ethan returned late that afternoon, she was in the kitchen with Marta, wiping down the counters. "Afternoon," he said casually, stepping inside. "Good evening, sir," Amara replied without looking at him, her voice polite but hollow. He paused. Normally, she'd at least meet his eyes when speaking. "Everything in order today?" "Yes, sir." That was it. No small updates about the pantry, no quiet note about the roses blooming in the garden, things she usually mentioned in passing. Ethan almost asked if she'd noticed anything unusual, but the words died before reaching his tongue. That night, in his study, he poured himself a whiskey and replayed the footage again. Her hesitation, the way she shut the safe, that faint tightening in her jaw. It should have satisfied him. The test was passed, but instead, it gnawed at him, burrowing under his skin. Why had it mattered to him how she felt? The next morning, their dance of detachment continued. She moved through the halls like a ghost in black, her footsteps soft but deliberate. Ethan found himself watching her longer than usual, waiting for a crack in the mask she wore. At one point, as she polished the silver tray in the living room, he caught her reflection in the glass window. Her eyes flicked toward him briefly, then dropped again. No hostility, no warmth, just distance. It irritated him more than he expected. Later that day, he intercepted her in the hallway outside the study. "Amara," he said, his tone casual but probing. "How long have you been working here now?" "Almost 2 years, sir. And in all that time, I've never had a reason to doubt you." Her eyes met his then, and for the first time since the test, he saw the quiet storm behind them. "Good to know," she said flatly, before stepping past him. The words were polite. The delivery was not. Ethan stood there for a long moment, the echo of her voice clinging to him like smoke. That evening, Marta found Amara in the pantry, staring at the rows of neatly labeled jars. "You okay?" Marta asked softly. Amara forced a smile. "Just tired." But inside she was anything but tired. She was disappointed that even after nearly 2 years of honest work, she was still just another suspect in her employer's eyes. She hadn't touched the money. Not because she feared getting caught, but because she'd promised herself long ago she wouldn't let desperation dictate her morals. And yet, the sting of being tested without cause lingered. Ethan, meanwhile, sat in the study, swirling the last inch of whiskey in his glass. His gaze flicked to the safe. What had he been hoping for? To catch her stealing, to prove himself right about people. Instead, all he'd done was build another wall between them. But why did that matter so much now? He set the glass down and rubbed his temples. This wasn't over. Do you think Ethan should admit to Amara that he left the safe open on purpose? Or would that make things worse? Comment below. Your take might just be the next plot twist. The next 3 days passed like a chess match no one wanted to admit they were playing. Moves and counter-moves. Avoidance as strategy. Ethan noticed Amara was more efficient than ever, her work spotless, her timing precise, her presence nearly invisible. If she was in the same room as him, she was on the far side of it. If he entered a room, she'd find a reason to leave within minutes. It was infuriating. Not because she was failing at her job, if anything she was performing flawlessly, but because she was treating him like a stranger. On the 4th morning, he lingered in the kitchen as she loaded the dishwasher. "You've been quiet lately," he said, leaning against the counter. "Just keeping busy," she replied, without looking up. Her tone was smooth, but it had an edge, like a blade sheathed in velvet. "Everything all right?" he pressed. "Yes, sir." The "sir" landed heavier than usual, like she was building a wall out of formality. Ethan almost blurted it out. "I tested you. You passed." "I was wrong." But the words stayed trapped behind pride and the habit of control. That evening, he sat in the study with the safe closed, locked and humming quietly in its place. He told himself he'd imagined the shift in her behavior, but the truth was harder to swallow. He had caused it. His phone buzzed. A text from his friend Julian. "Drinks tonight? You look like you need to get out of your own head." Ethan almost declined, but something in him wanted distance from the estate, from the heavy air Amara left in her wake. At the bar, Julian laughed too loudly and flirted with the waitress, but Ethan barely heard him. His thoughts kept circling back to the image of Amara closing the safe, her jaw tight, her eyes shadowed. Julian finally asked, "What's eating you? You look like you lost a bet." Ethan smirked faintly. "Something like that." The next morning, Marta found Amara polishing the silver again, even though it gleamed. "You're going to rub a hole in that tray," Marta teased gently. Amara shrugged. "Better than sitting still." Marta gave her a knowing look. "You're upset with him." Amara paused, cloth in hand. "I'm not upset," Just reminded. Of what? That some people will never see you for who you are, only for what they're afraid you might be. Marta didn't push further, but her eyes softened with quiet sympathy. Later that day, Ethan caught Amara in the library dusting the top shelves. "I've been thinking," he said. She didn't turn around. "About what, sir?" He hesitated. "About trust." Finally she faced him, her gaze steady but unreadable. "Trust is a two-way street." He nodded slowly, but before he could reply, her phone rang, a soft chime that seemed almost out of place in the quiet room. She glanced at the screen, then excused herself without another word. Ethan stood there, staring at the space she'd just occupied, feeling the conversation slip away like water through his fingers. That night, lying in bed, he told himself he'd drop it. He had more important things to focus on: investments, property acquisitions, a meeting with the mayor next week. But when he closed his eyes, he saw her hand pressing the safe shut, not taking, not tempted, just refusing. And somehow, that refusal felt like a judgment against him personally. When someone pulls away after being hurt, do you believe it's better to give them space or push for a conversation? Share your thoughts below. This is where the story could turn either way. The storm rolled in without warning, thick clouds swallowing the late afternoon light, wind howling like it had a score to settle. By the time Amara finished vacuuming the hallway rugs, the first thunderclap rattled the estate's high windows. Marta poked her head into the hall. "Road advisories are out. Power lines are down in the next county over. I'll head out now before it gets worse," Amara said, untying her apron. Marta frowned. "Driveway's already blocked. A maple came down across the lower bend. Grounds crew won't be able to clear it until morning." Before Amara could reply, Ethan appeared at the top of the staircase, one hand resting on the polished banister. "You're staying here tonight." His tone was more command than suggestion. Amara's spine stiffened. "I can walk down to the main road." "In this?" He gestured toward the window where rain lashed sideways against the glass. "You'd be soaked and probably flattened by a tree branch before you made it 100 yards. Her lips pressed together, the protest dying in her throat. She hated feeling cornered, especially by him. Marta busied herself making dinner, leaving the two of them in a silence that felt both fragile and unyielding. The dining table was set for 3, but when Marta excused herself early, muttering something about checking the generator, Ethan and Amara were left alone. He cleared his throat. "Sit. You've been on your feet all day." She sat, but her posture remained perfectly straight, like she was bracing for impact. They ate in near silence, the clink of silverware loud against the rain's constant drumbeat. Halfway through, Ethan spoke. "You ever get tired of the quiet here?" Her eyes lifted from her plate. "I'm used to quiet." "That's not what I asked." She hesitated. "Sometimes it's nice. Sometimes it's heavy." "Yeah," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Heavy's a good word for it." After dinner, the storm knocked the power out completely. Darkness swallowed the estate, broken only by the flicker of the fireplace Ethan lit in the study. Amara lingered in the doorway, unsure if she should retreat to the guest room or join him. He looked up from the fire. "You're welcome to sit. Safer than pacing dark hallways." She stepped inside slowly, perching on the far end of the leather sofa. The fire's crackle filled the space between them. Outside, branches scraped the windows, wind howling through unseen cracks. "You grew up here?" she asked suddenly. Ethan shook his head. "No. Bought it when the company went public. It felt like proof." "Proof of what?" "That I'd made it. That I was untouchable." He smirked faintly, gaze fixed on the flames. "Turns out being untouchable just means no one gets close." Amara studied him for a moment, then looked away. "Some people like it that way. Do you?" Her laugh was quiet, but humorless. "Doesn't matter what I like. You learn to live with what you're given." The fire popped, sending a small ember floating upward before it faded. Neither spoke for a while, but something in the air shifted, still heavy, but no longer impenetrable. When a particularly loud gust rattled the window pane, she glanced toward it, then back to him. "If this house blows away, I'm blaming you." The corner of his mouth lifted, just a fraction. Fair enough. It was the smallest crack in the wall between them, but it was there. Have you ever been stuck with someone you were avoiding? And did it make things better or worse? Drop your story in the comments. I'm curious how that tension plays out in real life. The storm refused to let up. By morning, the estate grounds glistened with puddles, and branches littered the driveway like fallen matchsticks. The hum of the backup generator was the only sign of life besides the rain. Marta had driven her small SUV as far as the road allowed to meet her husband, leaving Ethan and Amara alone. After breakfast, Amara gathered the cleaning supplies, determined to busy herself. But when she passed the study, Ethan's voice stopped her. "Amara, come here a second." She stepped inside, wary. He was at the desk, a leather-bound photo album open in front of him. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite. "I still have rooms to—" "They'll wait." She hesitated, then sat. He turned the album toward her. Old photographs, grainy, sun-faded images of a boy in hand-me-down clothes standing in front of a rusted trailer. "That's me," Ethan said quietly. She blinked, glancing between him and the boy in the picture. "You grew up?" "In the middle of nowhere, with a father who drank more than he worked and a mother who disappeared before I could walk. I learned early that if I wanted something, I'd have to take it, and if I wanted to keep it, I'd have to protect it from everyone, because sooner or later, they'd try to take it back." His tone was matter-of-fact, but his eyes stayed fixed on the photographs as if looking at her might make the admission too raw. Amara leaned back slightly. "That's why you don't trust anyone." "That's why I test people," he corrected, though the word sounded hollow even to him. She let a long moment pass before speaking. "You know what I learned early?" He met her gaze, waiting. "That your word is the only thing you can't afford to lose. Money comes and goes. Jobs, too. But if people stop believing your word, you've got nothing." It wasn't said with heat or anger, just a quiet conviction that landed heavier than any accusation. Ethan didn't reply immediately. He studied her, as if trying to reconcile the woman before him with the version he'd been keeping in his head. "Is that why you shut the safe?" he asked finally. Her brows rose. "I shut the safe because it wasn't mine to open, not because I thought you'd thank me for it." The air between them tightened, but it wasn't quite hostility. It was truth. They spent the rest of the morning in the study, him leafing through the album, her dusting the shelves in a slower, more thoughtful rhythm. Around noon, when the rain eased to a drizzle, they moved to the kitchen. Ethan boiled water for tea, a rare gesture from a man who usually had everything prepared for him. He set the steaming mug in front of her. "For the record, you've given me more reason to trust you than anyone in years." She looked at him for a long moment before replying, "Then, maybe stop looking for reasons not to." It wasn't a truce, not yet. But it was the first bridge built between two very stubborn shores. If someone from your past shaped the way you trust, or don't trust, people now, what happened? Share if you're comfortable. Stories like that are often more relatable than we think. By late afternoon, the storm had softened to a gentle rain, and the estate felt oddly peaceful. The constant hum of the generator had faded into the background, replaced by the steady drip of water from the gutters outside. Amara was in the kitchen, carefully slicing bread for sandwiches, when Ethan walked in carrying a dusty box. "What's that?" she asked. "Board games," he said, with an almost sheepish shrug. "Figured we could try not sitting in separate rooms pretending we don't exist." Her brows arched. "You play board games?" "I used to," he said, setting the box on the counter. "Mostly when the power went out, back when the only entertainment we had was candles and a deck of cards." There was something almost boyish in the way he said it. They ended up in the study with a game of Scrabble spread out between them, the fire once again crackling in the hearth. At first, the conversation was sparse, the occasional word about the tiles on the board, but slowly something shifted. When Ethan placed the word wealthy across a triple word score, Amara smirked. Shocking choice. You could challenge it, he teased. I'm more interested in making lonely intersect it, she replied, laying her tiles down with a quiet satisfaction. He chuckled, a sound she hadn't heard from him before. Not polite, not measured, just real. As the game went on, they drifted into stories. Ethan told her about the time he and Julian, as teenagers, had tried to borrow a neighbor's canoe and ended up sinking it in the middle of a lake. Amara laughed so hard she had to set her tiles down. I can't imagine you in a canoe. You probably wore cufflinks. I was 14, he said, grinning. I didn't own cufflinks. Yet. In turn, she told him about her younger sister Maya, how she'd worked 3 jobs to put her through nursing school, how Maya had been the reason she never let her pride slip, no matter how bad things got. That's incredible, he said softly. You did all that for her? She's family, Amara replied simply, as though that was all the explanation needed. The rain picked up again after sunset, but inside the air was warmer, not from the fire, but from the ease that had settled between them. At one point, when the power flickered and the lights dimmed, Ethan rose to light more candles. The glow caught the sharp planes of his face, softening them in ways Amara hadn't seen before. You ever think, he said, as he set a candle on the table, that maybe the people we trust the least are the ones we should give the most chance to prove us wrong? Her gaze held his for a long moment. And you ever think that if you stopped testing people, you might find out they were worth trusting all along? Neither looked away first. By the time they packed up the game, the room smelled faintly of melting wax and wood smoke. It was the first time in 2 years Amara had lingered in the study after finishing her work, and the first time Ethan had wanted her to. And for both of them, that realization felt like the beginning of something they weren't ready to name. Do you think lighter moments are the key to rebuilding trust? Or do serious conversations do more? Share your thoughts. This debate is as old as relationships themselves. The next morning brought clear skies, sunlight streaming through the estate's high windows like a quiet promise that the storm had passed. Ethan found himself in the kitchen earlier than usual, brewing coffee. Amara walked in, hair slightly looser than normal, her expression calm. They exchanged a small, unspoken smile, an acknowledgement of the strange, unplanned companionship the storm had forced on them. It might have been a good day. It should have been. Until the doorbell rang. Ethan opened the door to find Clara standing there, his ex-fiancée, perfectly styled, lips curved in a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Well, she said, stepping inside without invitation. You still live in this museum of yours? What do you want, Clara? Ethan asked, his voice cool. I was in town. Thought I'd drop by, catch up. Her gaze drifted toward the kitchen, where Amara had just set down a tray of clean glasses. Clara's smile sharpened. And who's this? Before Ethan could answer, Clara continued, her tone dripping with condescension. I see you've diversified your staff. Very progressive of you. Amara's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Ethan's stomach knotted. He should have spoken up immediately, shut Clara down, made it clear her words were unacceptable. But the old reflex to keep situations controlled, to avoid direct conflict, froze him for just a second too long. And in that second, Clara's smirk deepened. I suppose someone has to dust all this wealth you hoard. Amara didn't flinch, didn't respond. She simply placed the last glass in the cupboard, nodded politely to Ethan, and walked past both of them toward the service entrance. Amara, Ethan started, but she didn't stop. The sound of the door clicking shut behind her landed like a gunshot. Clara laughed softly. Oh, did I interrupt something? Ethan turned on her, voice low but sharp. Get out. Her smile faltered. Excuse me. You heard me. Get out. A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she shrugged and sauntered toward the door. Suit yourself. Still touchy, I see. The moment she was gone, Ethan's chest felt too tight. He replayed the scene in his mind, every second of his hesitation magnified until it was unbearable. He found Amara in the staff parking area, unlocking her car. Amara, wait, he said, approaching quickly. She didn't look at him. I'm not upset about her, Ethan. I'm upset about you. The words landed like a slap. You didn't say anything, she continued, her voice steady but charged. You let her talk to me like that and you said nothing. 2 days ago you were telling me I'd given you reason to trust me, and today you let someone treat me like I'm less than a person. His mouth opened, but no defense came out. She shook her head. I've dealt with that my whole life. I don't need it where I work, and I definitely don't need it from someone who claims to see me differently. With that, she got in her car and drove away, leaving him standing in the sunlight that suddenly felt as cold as marble. Back in the study, Ethan sat in silence. The safe loomed in the corner, closed and locked, but now it seemed to mock him. He had tested her once, and she had passed. Now, when he had been tested, he had failed. And he wasn't sure she'd give him another chance. If someone stayed silent when they should have defended you, could you forgive them? Or would that silence speak louder than any apology? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your take. The estate felt emptier than usual, not just quiet, hollow. Ethan sat in the study that evening, staring at the untouched glass of whiskey on the desk. Clara's words had faded, but Amara's, those stayed. I'm upset about you. It wasn't anger in her voice that haunted him. It was disappointment, the kind that said he had confirmed her worst expectations. He'd spent years convincing himself that his guardedness protected him. But now he could see the truth. It had made him a coward. For the first time in a long time, he didn't try to think his way through the problem. He just felt it. The shame, the regret, the fear that this might be beyond repair. He thought of the way she had shut the safe, the way she had sat across from him in the candlelight, teasing him over a board game, the way she had told him to stop looking for reasons not to trust her, and then the way she had walked away without looking back. By morning, the decision was made. Ethan drove to the city, his car cutting through the light fog that clung to the streets. He parked outside a modest brick apartment building, the kind where tenants hung plants in the windows and kids rode scooters on the sidewalk. He climbed the narrow stairwell to the 3rd floor and knocked on the door marked 3B. It opened a crack. Amara's eyes appeared first, cautious. What are you doing here? I came to talk. I'm not interested in excuses. Good, he said quickly, because I don't have one. I only have the truth, and it's this. I froze. I let my pride and my old habits get in the way. I should have defended you. I should have shut her down before she finished her sentence. She studied him for a long moment. Why didn't you? Because for years I've been afraid of conflict, afraid that letting my guard down would make me lose something. But I realized yesterday that I lost something anyway. I lost you. She opened the door a little wider but didn't invite him in. You don't know me well enough to lose me, she said softly. I know enough, he replied. Enough to know I trust you more than anyone. Enough to know I care about you, not as an employee, not as someone who passed my stupid test, but as someone I want in my life. Her gaze dropped for a moment, then lifted again. Words are easy, Ethan, he nodded. Then let me prove it. From his coat pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box. She didn't take it right away, but her eyes flicked to it. It's not jewelry, he said, opening it to reveal a simple silver key. What is that? The spare key to my safe, he said quietly. Because the truth is, you've had it all along. This just makes it official. Silence stretched between them. The hum of the city filtered in from the street below. Car horns, distant voices, the rattle of the L train. Finally, Amara reached out and took the box. This doesn't fix everything, she said. I know, he replied, but maybe it can be a start. For the first time since the storm, her expression softened. Give me time, she said, as much as you need. When she closed the door, Ethan didn't feel the sting of rejection. He felt the weight of a choice made, and the quiet hope that it might be the right one. If someone admits their failure and makes a real effort to change, do you think trust can fully return, or is it never the same? Share your view. This is one of the toughest calls in any relationship. 2 weeks passed, 2 weeks of polite but brief conversations at work, 2 weeks of Ethan giving her space, No grand gestures, no forced apologies, just quiet consistency. Amara noticed the difference. He no longer hovered near the study door when she came to clean it. He no longer locked the safe when she was in the room, even if he stepped away. He even started brewing extra coffee in the mornings, leaving a steaming mug on the counter with her name written on a sticky note. She never said thank you aloud, but she drank it every time. One Friday evening, after the last of the staff had left, Amara was gathering her things when Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. He led her to the garden, where the last traces of sunset bled into the horizon. The air was cool, scented faintly with roses and damp earth. "I wanted to show you something," he said, handing her a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it to find a letter, formal at first, but quickly giving way to something more personal. "I am sorry I made you feel small. I am sorry I hesitated when you needed me to stand tall. You have shown me more integrity than most people I've known in my life, and I would be a fool to risk losing that again." Amara read it twice, her fingers tracing the words. "You wrote this?" "I needed you to have it in writing," he said with a small smile. "In case I ever forget, you can remind me." They stood there in silence for a moment, the garden lights flickering on one by one. "I'm not used to people admitting they're wrong," she said finally. "I'm not used to admitting it," he replied, "but for you, I'm willing to get used to it." A laugh escaped her, soft but genuine. "You're still a little full of yourself. And you're still not afraid to tell me," he said. She handed the letter back, but he shook his head. "It's yours, keep it." Her gaze held his for a long moment, and in that stillness, something shifted. Not a dramatic revelation, but the quiet certainty that the walls between them were no longer unscalable. "I trust you," she said, the words simple but weighted, and for Ethan, it felt like the most valuable thing he had ever been given. They walked back toward the house together, their steps unhurried. At the back door, he paused. "Dinner tomorrow?" he asked. "Not here. Somewhere with good food and bad lighting." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "We'll see." But when she walked away, there was no coldness in it, just the promise that she might say yes. Inside, the study waited, safe closed but unlocked. The key he had given her was nowhere in sight, yet he knew she still had it. That was enough. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like a home. Do you believe love and trust can grow stronger after being tested, or is the first crack always there? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to know your perspective.